We are joined here today by Brita Horn. Who was 3 months into her role as Denver's first ever Chief Housing Officer. You kind of write the job description as you go. Welcome.
Thank you.
What is the state of affordable housing in Denver? People clearly are passionate about it.
Yes, they are very passionate about it. And it's an exciting time to be in affordable housing, frankly, in the city of Denver. The city of Denver has stepped up with local funds in an unprecedented way. Just in 2011, we had relied primarily on federal funds, and now we have local funds, and we're deploying our biggest budget ever in 2019.
So Mayor Michael Hancock has called affordable housing the most critical issue facing our city. I know there's been a funding increase, but honestly, does your budget look anything like it's the most critical issue facing the city?
I think that, like I said, that we are trying to maximize the leveraged resources that are out there so that we can do the most good with the public dollar. And so I think it's a great step. Is it enough? Is it everything? No. But I do think it is a major priority of this administration. So
the city has recently come up with about $15 million additional for affordable housing. To put that in some perspective for people, the light up sign out near the airport that we've talked about costs us $11.5 million. What could you have done for affordable housing with another $11.5 million?
Yeah, so we put about $30,000 per unit into affordable housing. So take that amount, and that tells you how many units we could potentially leverage with that amount of funding. What is standing between where we are now and Denver funding, with all due respect, a serious effort to deal with affordable housing? Well, I think this is a serious effort. I also sit on the State Housing Board for the state of Colorado, and $38 million are going for the whole state. For affordable housing. Does that say more about Colorado, or does that say more about Denver? I think it says about both city and state government that we are learning how to better leverage the funds and to grow those funds within our cities and our state. Let's talk about where those funds come from. You talked about federal funding, which was the old mechanism. Now there is some local funding. City Councilman Albus Brooks has sat where you're sitting now and told me that he would like to look at developers paying more. I think developers have done pretty well under Mayor Hancock. Should they be paying more? Our mayor has said that we should expect more of developers, and so we're looking obviously not just at our linkage fee, but how we look at major redevelopment areas. These are key opportunities within our city that will be shaping our city for the next decades, and we need to look at what we're asking as a city of those who are going to build these key places in our community. What's your philosophical approach to the idea of, you talk about developers building these key places, these popular places. What is your philosophy about having affordable housing units there, or just extracting cash from the developers so that you can build more units out someplace else that's less desirable? I think it should be a mix. I think there needs to be the chance for housing that people can afford in all of our neighborhoods, including some of these key places. In a number of Denver's neighborhoods, the best shot at affordable housing will probably come through density. What are your thoughts about, I know that that's not within your purview necessarily, but what are your thoughts about the current level of density in Denver's neighborhoods, and how does that need to change in, say, the next decade? Well, it's already been changing. That's what those of us who live here have been feeling for some time. And I think that we're seeing that we can get more people into places and activate those places with that density. And so I think you'll continue to see interesting ideas like overlays that give incentives for people who want more height or more density to also look at how they're going to give us deeper affordability in our community. Denver also has a program, albeit not that large, that subsidizes the cost of market rate housing when developers have unfilled units. Why step in to bail out the developer as opposed to saying, you know what, sit there with your unit empty until you lower the price and then it'll be more affordable for people? Why come in with the city's cash or taxpayer money to bail them out? Yeah, I think you're referring to Live Denver, and I don't really see that as a bailout program so much as trying to meet a need that we have, which is we cannot currently build our way out of this affordable housing crisis, and there are units that are sitting empty. Could we try to capitalize on the units that are in our community and available and get people who need affordability into them. And I think it's an innovative idea. Well, do we know if it's working yet? No. We're just starting the pilot. So we're not the only city that's very interested in what's the outcome of this pilot. But I think it's an innovative approach and we need new ideas.
Do you worry that it might send a message to developers that if they overbuild, the city will come in and bail them out by covering the cost?
We're talking about 125 units, and we're not talking about covering the whole gap for these developers or builders. We're talking about meeting the needs in a voucher-like system where we're paying for that gap between what there is and what a person can afford. So I don't see it as trying to make people whole or 125 units doing a whole lot to turn that around for a developer or builder.
What do you see other cities doing in the affordable housing space that we are not, for some reason, doing here yet?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. We're actually part of a couple of national groups. We find ourselves as a high-cost city now, also working on anti-displacement. And so we continue to look at the innovative approaches that others have, specifically in how to measure some of these things, like displacement. How is it happening? How are your interventions working? But we're on the cutting edge with those other cities. So there's not so many that are very far ahead of us in this work. At the same time, there are some cities like Boston and some of our East Coast cities that have been struggling with affordability for a longer period of time. And so we are able to look at some of those investments that they've made and see if they're making a difference.
What have they done there that we haven't tried here? It's
not that we haven't tried it, it's even that some of the things that we've done, like inclusionary housing, which is something that other communities have done. There's some things that are different between some of the states and communities where that was happening in Colorado, in how closings happen and other factors that we're now seeing play out.
You were talking about displacement. When you've got folks who are in a neighborhood, perhaps long-term, perhaps generationally, and can no longer afford to live there. Can gentrification and development happen in a neighborhood without displacement?
I think there's some that will happen. It's the rapid pace is very hard for folks. And so how can we even that out? How can we give people that hope and that chance if they want to live in their neighborhood, that they can do that? I've also seen people who are very happy to cash in on that investment that they've made in a neighborhood and choose to live somewhere else. And that's their choice as well. But for those who want to stay, we want to make that a possibility.
Can I ask you about the word gentrification? That kind of became the flashpoint of a debate within the last year, that this is the ink coffee sign that people got so excited about. And then we heard some pushback from viewers saying, explain to me how gentrification is not just simply development cast in a pejorative light. When you hear that term, how do you think about the idea of gentrification?
Well, I've worked in community and economic development for a while, and I see us trying to make more complete neighborhoods. There are neighborhoods that have lacked investment and amenities that people want. And as those investments and amenities come in, it also changes the neighborhood. And so how do we balance those things that keep the fabric of a neighborhood in place, that the people that want to stay there can stay there, but also get some of these amenities more equitably distributed throughout our city.
And what is the city's chief lever to make that happen? I mean, it seems like the city could influence that in myriad ways. What do you see as the biggest stick that you have to make that happen?
Well, I am the chief housing officer, so I think housing stability is a key part of any neighborhood's fabric, and having a diversity of choices so that people you know, I've myself been a renter, bought that fixer-up at the beginning of my home ownership lifespan, and now moved into something that was more appropriate for a growing family. I'd love to see different options throughout the neighborhoods of Denver so that people feel that they can be there for their complete lives.
And lastly, let's talk about the city's affordable housing program. We focused a lot on what ended up happening specifically in Green Valley Ranch, where the city kind of lost the handle on hundreds and hundreds of these units that ended up getting sold to people who claimed that they didn't know about the restrictions on that housing. We now have a situation where the city has said, well, even if you shouldn't be allowed in the housing, we're going to allow you to stay, but you can't sell it for more than what we allow. That sounds to me like this is going to get settled in court. Is that where you guys expect that this is going to head?
I hope that we can get as many of these under compliance and preserve the affordability as much as possible. I'm pleased to sit here today and say out of the 306 cases that we identified as potentially out of compliance, 121 have been resolved. So we're working our way through that. We want to extend as many olive branches to work with folks who are in a tough situation. Will some of it get settled in court? I'm sure. What we're trying to do is, as a city, say, this is something that we think we can offer. You can settle out your claim with the city. You can reserve your rights for others that you may hold responsible in this chain. But let's give you a way to stay where you are as a homeowner and still preserve the affordability for the city, because at the end of the day, we've spent some money to have affordable housing, and we need to preserve it.
Is there a bigger lesson that you think the city has learned as a result of this?
Well, as somebody who's looking ahead, I want to see how are we resourcing compliance over the long term. We as a city have made a goal to provide deeper affordability and longer term affordability, and with that comes an investment that we have to track for a longer period of time, and government budgets tend to go up and down. So how do we create a baseline of what we need to fund from the beginning of any project or any policy so that we know that we can very reasonably administer the program over its life.
Basic idea of how many bodies do you have at City Hall watching to make sure these properties don't get away from you? Do you have that mechanism right now? Do you have the people, and do you have the mechanism so that we're not going to have a bunch more of these houses slip out of your hands?
Yeah, I believe that we're getting on top of it. As far as, do I have everything set out for the future? We're refining that right now. I do believe that we have good support for where we're at this point. We have a 7-person compliance team, and now it's about projecting with these new projects and key places that are getting developed. How do we manage that into the future, and what's the appropriate level?
And lastly, what would you love to be able to come back here and say in a year or two?
I would love to say that we have preserved more housing for folks, that we've built more housing for folks, and that we've stabilized people in their housing by utilizing programs and services through our nonprofit partners and through other partners that help build these units. At the end of the day, the city of Denver, you don't see me with a construction belt here and a hammer. We rely on our partners, and so I hope to tell you about what our partners are doing and how they're serving the people of Denver.
Brita Horn, thank you so much for stopping by. Appreciate your perspective, and look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Kyle.